There we go. Hi, everyone. I'm Don Saucier. I'm the Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center. We have an awesome TLC staff, a bit of an expanded TLC staff this semester. So I want to give a shout out to some additional people who are working with us. If you've been before, you know Noah Rankin. Noah is awesome. He does a lot of the stuff. As we were mentioning before we started the recording of this, Mary Cook, Mary wave, please. That's Mary. Mary's been doing our social media. So, watch us on Facebook and Twitter and those kind of things to get lots of resources and information. And also Hayden. Hayden will wave. Hayden is new and he's helping us with our professional development series, which you're all at. So it's been awesome. So we got an expanded team doing awesome stuff. Ashley Schiffer's still on the team, just can't be here today. She's got a conflict. But we got a lot of stuff going on, a lot of people doing the work. So it's amazing. If you ever have ideas or suggestions, please reach out to us and we'll see what we can do. This is the professional development series. We meet at noon every Wednesday over the course of the semester, and we have an amazing list of events coming up for you. One of the people that I just mentioned will drop that list into the chat, or a link to that list into the chat. We have wonderful things, wonderful presentations coming up. We also give a certificate as well as potentially fellow status for people who take part in our professional development series. We give those certificates both for graduate teaching assistants as well as for faculty and staff. So definitely check those out. For those of you who want to apply to be a fellow, spoiler alert, people who apply for fellow have to be willing to do a workshop for us in the next year in the professional development series. And part of that application process is telling us what you do. So it's a great way to kind of increase the community that we have to talk about teaching. So that's who we are, what we do, and you're all here. One of our events about each month is what we call a teaching chat. And that's what you have arrived to today. A teaching chat is where we just kind of talk about things. And I always have some questions to ask in case, the conversation ever gets a little bit lackadaisical. I'll interject a question that I want to have or something that I want to crowdsource from the wonderful people who are on this call. If you want to engage in the chat using your voice, that's absolutely great. We can also look at the virtual chat on the side. We'll be monitoring that. If there's a question you want me to ask for you, you can send me a direct message. I'll be happy to ask your question out loud to the group. And if you just want to sit back and listen, that's absolutely fine too. So this is our first teaching chat. And I myself just had my first couple of classes of the semester over the last couple of days, and I wanted to know how it was going. And I know some people don't love the live transcriptions and they're not 100% accurate, but there has been a request to do that, so I've enabled that for this conversation today.
Well, Don, last year around this time, I talked about the fact that was the first time I'd done my intercession as a Zoom that we didn't anticipate. So this is the second time we've done it. And we've learned a lot of lessons.
So what's the biggest lesson that you've learned, LB?
I think Houston and I, who repeated exactly what we did last year, because it worked. Well, this year with 50 people, it didn't work. So we realized we needed to be more descriptive for this group of students who got confused sometime about the directions. But more than that, we had tech problems. The first week, we didn't have the overload of Zoom, but the last 2 weeks, there were a lot of files that should have uploaded that couldn't upload because of the size of them. And it was frustrating because the lessons and the instructions I would give in the morning sometimes didn't reach the students until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And that was very frustrating for us because we had to change our due date from that night to the next day. And it tells me that what I intend to do about that is only give them the instructions in one video and the examples and the discussion in a second video. That way they can get to the heart of the matter without having to hear all the other conversation.
Mm-hmm. I like the streamlining you're suggesting there. I think streamlining has definitely been a theme of our response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and making sure that things are easy to find, they're accessible, they're given in a format that's going to be helpful for people. And you've shown your flexibility in pivoting with the tech that you have to make that happen. I'll say that tech is fun. I was walking to my class this morning, actually walking by my class this morning. It wasn't even class time yet. Noah is my GTA for that class, and I saw him in there fiddling with the technology, and I was like, is everything okay? And thankfully it was. But I think adapting to those kind of circumstances is excellent. How is it going for the rest of y'all? Seeing a lot of those ambiguous nods. We get those ambiguous nods a lot.
I'm starting this semester fully on Zoom, which I haven't done before. I've been teaching in person the entire pandemic, except for the end of 2020 when no one did. So it's a really different experience for me not to have that first day in person with my students. I've made a bigger effort to get to know them through individual emails, and that's helped, but I don't feel like I actually saw them today, even though we did have class. So I'm curious how many other people are doing things in person versus on Zoom. And if you're on Zoom, what you're doing to try to create that class community and that increased relationship between instructor and student. I hope to be back in person in a couple weeks, but no one knows. So I would love to hear ideas about that.
So how many people are on Zoom for the whole semester? Kind of show of hands for at least one of their classes. All right, so one kind of ish, maybe another. How many of you are starting the semester on Zoom but hope to return to online sometime soon? All right, so Melissa. I think that one of the things that I've kind of tried to do throughout this whole kind of thing is to make the Zoom classroom the best approximation I can of a good face-to-face classroom. Having those frequent touch points, having the conversation, even things like starting my class like this in the Brady Bunch mode before we go to a PowerPoint slide or a Canvas page or some of those kinds of things. We have a video about kind of doing these kind of things, and Noah's going to drop some of that chat with some of the resources and ideas that we've put out. But I didn't want to go to Zoom. It's one of those things where my department head kind of reached out and kind of let us know if we want to do that temporarily, let him know why, and he would consider it. And I just kind of didn't want to. I was really interested. I'm teaching my classes HyFlex. So you can attend my class over Zoom, but I will be there in person. We also post them later for asynchronous viewing for students who can't be there in real time. And I was kind of nervous that I wouldn't have a face-to-face audience. And that hasn't been a concern. For one of my classes, I only had one person in Zoom the first day, and that person couldn't be there for some logistical reason and intends to be there face-to-face generally. But then our class this morning, I think we had a good 2/3 that were there in face-to-face, a larger class, and about a third that was Zooming in. It felt weird, to have kind of a larger face-to-face class, it kind of have a lot of people in that room. But I liked it. And I don't know what the safest thing to be doing right now. I don't know what the right thing is to be doing right now. But I think what you're doing, Melissa, and thinking about how can we create connections and how can we engage even when we don't have those face-to-face skills and opportunities, I think that's awesome. So maybe some practical tips that the rest of you could kind of throw out into this conversation for how it is that we can create community in a Zoom experience. And I think Brandon may have dropped a couple in the chat. Let's see.
I'm doing kind of the same thing you're describing. I've done HyFlex, where I'm in person, but make it so that for any student, they can choose to participate synchronously in person or Zoom at their discretion. Also record the lectures, which comes in handy if for some reason they can't. And started doing that as we kind of came back, and just have found a lot of students really have enjoyed that. What I do think is interesting, I think it goes to what you've described, is that our students are learning for themselves how they learn more effectively. And like 3 semesters ago, I was seeing more than 3/4 of the students choosing the Zoom option and 1/4 coming in person. And it's starting to swing much more strongly the other way, that at the end of the semester, this last semester, I still had half of my students coming in person, whereas before it was like 3 were coming in person.
Now, one thing I'll say to that too, for anyone who's kind of considering doing this HyFlex teaching, and Greg, I do see your hand, thank you. for anyone who's kind of considered this HyFlex teaching, it's more work up front. It's hard to manage, but as the semester degrades, as students are going into isolation and quarantine, as students can't be there, it's actually quite simplified because you already have those contingencies and those options in place for students who will need them. And it's not an if they'll need them, it's when they'll need them. So I think that, you know, at the beginning of last semester, a lot of people, there's a lot more work. But as the semester progressed, and we had 200 people in one of my classes last semester, it really wasn't added work as those kind of things kind of showed up. Students knew how to engage my class no matter what their circumstances were. So it is more work, but it saves some problems later. Greg, you have your hand up, and it's good to see you.
Good to see you, Dawn, and everyone. Yeah, I also decided before the semester started that I just have to, at least for the first part of the semester, just do HyFlex and no questions, just like if you can come in person, do and wear your mask. If you can't, here's the link, we'll be there during class time. And I also added that, like, if you can't, if neither of those work for you for some reason, so sick that you can't, you know, engage with Zoom, let me know, and I would work with those students to, you know, maybe it's like Brandon, I'll just record what happens in the class. Maybe it's something else, you know, notes, one-on-one tutoring to get caught up. But I didn't want to go through all those options until I actually had to. And so for the moment, we're just doing the HyFlex. The one thing I'm starting to do differently that I'm actually excited about, and it's just a little change, but I need help from the students, is I'm having one student kind of be in the Zoom room during class and kind of interact. One of the things I don't like about HyFlex is that I feel like my attention gets, you know, torn, that I'm going two ways at once, trying to pay attention to all the cool stuff going on in the class and what's going on at home. And sometimes the people at home just have black screens. I want to engage them, right? But I also respect if they don't want to have their screen turned on. So I'm experimenting, and Mary's been helping me with this, or she helped me on Tuesday. So thank you, Mary. Is just getting the students at home engaged via Zoom, and so that there's somebody in the classroom that sees what's going on. That student that's monitoring the chat can always say, hey, Dawn has a question, could you please, you know, or Noah did this. And I'm going to kind of rotate that role around the class and see how it goes. And I'm hoping this helps me with the thing I dislike most about HyFlex.
So one of the things I might even recommend too, for those of us who are doing HyFlex and having these offerings, I did this morning in my class, is I explained to my students what HyFlex was, and then the pros and cons of engaging in each of the three ways. So being there face-to-face synchronously, being there over Zoom synchronously, and then having asynchronous engagement. So kind of explaining to them, you know, what those options are, what my expectations are. For instance, my Zoom expectation is, unless you tell us you can't have your camera on, I expect it to be on. And I tell them why. You know, that allows me to kind of see your reactions. It creates accountability for you. You're less likely to be multitasking in the background and those kinds of things. But if it can't be on for whatever reason, just shoot us an email or a direct chat saying, hey, my video is off today. And that's completely fine. There'll be no questions asked. But I think letting our students know what we're doing and why, and how those things impact the decisions they make as students, I think taking our students into that confidence is an important thing to be doing.
I think, Don, there is a difference. And I'd be curious to know how many people teach a laboratory where the experimentation happens in the room and how you'd handle it on Zoom. So I see a difference in how studios work in laboratories, as opposed to how lectures work. So how many people have a different format, and how do you challenge the situation of Zoom or HyFlex for that matter?
So how many lab instructors do we have out there? Seen a couple, and Stu, I know that you have lab instructors that work with you on your class. So for those of you in that kind of situation, what are you doing to kind of create those experiences? Because when we first went, to that forced remote learning, a lot of the pushback came from people who had labs and said, I can't create those experiences online in the same way that I could face to face. So what kind of strategies and solutions have you all explored?
I'll just, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I'm a TA for general microbiology class, and to do microbiology, you have to be present in the lab. So that basically was the deal. So before in the semesters, we split our section of 40 students into 2 groups. So instead of having 2.5 hours of the lab time, half of the people would come on the first hour and the second half would come on the second hour. That was an option. And another thing, we would record our introductions before they do the experiment, so it would shorten their time in the lab. And they could access it anytime they want. That was our ways. But this semester, everything is in person, introductions are in person, and it's one large group of 40 people coming to the lab.
I have in the past taught a studio. This semester, I don't teach a studio till after spring break, but I am teaching a little course with a lab component, a field component, and to, besides like recording lectures and things like that, or, being able to take the lecture out into the field on my phone. I've also done a lot of planning for having in-class lab time via Google Jamboard, so that, whatever portion of students I have that are in Zoom, I can group them to contribute. And then the students who are in person, they can also be grouped to contribute, but everybody's contribution will be on one format that, I can then share my screen through Zoom, like we can all share on together. And I am not paid by Google to promote that, but I have really come to love Google Jamboard for its just like quick and dirty flexibility for online whiteboard kind of collaboration.
I love the introduction of these different kind of tech options. We talked about tech being a potential hindrance. Tech does exist to provide us with opportunities. So hearing about that previously, I've heard Brandon talk about Flipgrid and those kinds of things. It's really nice to hear these tech options that allow us to create some of those experiences. So one of the questions in the chat is, Melissa asks Anna, what do students do if they're sick and can't attend those microbiology labs in person?
So they have a specific assignment, so they have to contact the student center, and student center should send us TAs and instructor the notification, and only after that we kind of accept that you are on quarantine on a good reason. And at least in the last semesters, it was a specific person, specific TAs that was assigned to people who are in quarantine, and they would do a mini reports on some kind of microbiology topic, and they would submit it as their assignment to get points and not to fail in the class, basically.
And as Sarah notes in the chat, the provost's office has kind of put out some guidance. Everything's a moving target right now, that we're supposed to now accept those quarantines and isolations without confirmation from Student Life. Student Life has been kind of overloaded with that. So that's a new change just very recently, that we're supposed to take the students at their word at that point. I tend to err on the side of trusting my students than not trusting my students if I can. So if a student is saying, I can't be there for this, insert health reason, either physical health or mental health reason, I'm probably going to accept that and try to work with the student. But I also acknowledge that I'm not teaching microbiology lab where, the student is much more easily, brought back up to speed. One of the other ideas that I really liked in the chat is Melissa talked about a student taking minutes and kind of in their class and providing that to work on their professional writing skills. So not only is it a really good way to keep students engaged with each other, but actually practicing the content that is necessary for the course. So I really like that nice juxtaposition of their skill-based learning and their community building as they go through. So that was awesome.
I have another question. Now, I'm curious to know, without asking privacy issue between us, how does anyone who has been sick for whatever reason or absent from the classroom handle their classes? during a semester.
So if I'm a teacher and I get sick, what do I then do? I will say that the guidance on that has not maybe been as specific as it could be. And the term buddy system is one that has been offered in a number of cases where sleep and figure it out later is what Andy said. And that's to be honest, probably what would happen. One of the things that I would do if it impacted me is if I was sick and unable to teach my class, I would pursue alternatives, which could include using asynchronous videos from past semesters, which is something we had done during the COVID-19 pandemic, potentially having a teaching assistant contribute in ways that they were comfortable contributing. It wouldn't be the same experience or those kind of things. Or, just kind of straight up canceling if I couldn't do it. I don't have a buddy in my department who can just step in and teach my classes. And I don't know that many of us do. But I would say that is guidance that has not been very specific or maybe satisfying. What would the rest of you do if you suddenly couldn't teach your own class?
Well, I was just thinking in terms of it really depends on what you mean by sick. I mean, if I am like, I can't think, I can't do anything, then I don't really have much options myself because I don't have a buddy. No, I don't have another person that teaches sign language. So I would have to cancel the class and maybe figure out a way to, I have some recordings that they can look at to review, things like that. But if I were just, I'm worried about being contagious, but I'd probably be all right. I would, I may try to teach the class through Zoom and just send out a notification and just let the students know, hey, I can't be in the classroom today, but I can do class on Zoom. So please join me if you can. Those were my thoughts.
I think those are great thoughts. And for one of those advantages, talk about the HyFlex, it deals with student issues. If we're already teaching that class HyFlex, we already have that logistic structure set up if we need to offer our class remote moving forward. So a couple of people have also posted in the chat about using those videos from the prior semesters in the event that you have those available. We might have more resources equipped to kind of help us with that. But I do think we have to do something that, number one, makes us feel safe and makes our students feel safe. But I think finding a solution and realizing whatever solution you have is probably imperfect is probably realistic. I would try to do the best job that I could based on the circumstances I was facing. I'm also very, very lucky to work with only excellent graduate teaching assistants who are able to kind of be creative and help me come up with any kind of contingency we might have to do. But I know some of you might not have teaching assistants or not have a teaching assistant who has, the experience or the willingness to kind of engage in your class in that way. I guess if I was going to say it in a sentence, I would say just do the best you can.
Well, I do think some of that is department specific and college specific. And so I was looking to see if colleges had discussed this among their faculty as well, because I know it's pretty nebulous right now in terms of the university policy. And yet there's always an opportunity, a chance, God forbid, that we would be sick. I mean, we talk a lot about our students being ill or out of the room, but there's also our children who may make us be home or ourselves. So, we need to be thinking about that as well.
I think I'm doing a combination of preparing and hoping. And there are some things that I can prepare for and I can get myself ready for, but I'm very aware that I have not handled every potential contingency, and that's where the hope comes in. But yeah, I think that's what I can do right now in my classes.
I have to
So
say,
how
I
much
think
of the
that
concern
preparing
is-
for,
I'm sorry, please go ahead, Andy.
I was going to say, I think that preparing for every possible contingency is something that I'm just not, I was doing that in spring 2020 and in fall 2021. And we're at the point where I'm like, it's too much work. It's too much to be asked to do. And with the constant changing of what policies are, you know, I'm just like, you know what? Which is why I said sleep and figure it out later, you know, like there's some things where I'm just like, this semester, my mantra is like, I'm going to do what I can do. And I'm going to try not to stress about the things that are just out of my control. We'll see what happens.
And I think that's a very healthy way to look at things. A couple of the comments
come
in the
back to me
chat
like
are-
halfway through the semester, and I'll tell you how well I'm doing with it.
Right. So a couple of comments in the chat kind of advocate for preparing for the worst and hoping for the best, as well as taking it day by day, which is something Andy's talking about, and saying the future will figure itself out. One of the things to kind of, you know, I try to remind myself of this is, you know, what might be a big issue on Wednesday, January 19th, will probably not remain a big issue a month or two down the road. So kind of trying to find the context and the legitimate amount of attention and concern I should put on an issue is something I'm trying to do more. So how many of you have taught already this semester? All right, a number of you have. What's gone well? What's been something that has just been awesome so far?
My students,
So Greg's students are rocking. I would agree. My students in both of my classes were awesome. They were much more ready to engage in the face-to-face environment than I thought they might be. And that was really gratifying to see. How about the rest of you?
So I had really good luck with sending individual emails to students. I mostly copy pasted, but for two of my smaller classes, I put in their major and year to verify and to connect with them. And I've heard back from probably 90% of the students, and several of them responded and said, thanks for reaching out to me. I don't usually hear from an instructor before the semester starts, or thanks for sharing about yourself. So that's been a really positive thing for me so far.
So Melissa, I would say that you've had success, not luck, because you should own that. That's awesome.
I'll give a shout out to Trina because I have continued to pull out my OCDI materials every semester, and I did it again. And as much as it was like pulling teeth as I'm continuing to refine this class, like I did it, and I mapped out my course skeleton, and I even like got totally nerdy with it and mapped out all my classes to the quarter hour before the semester started. And I feel like, following a lot of the things from Online Course Design Institute, like I'm working in, different media, different ways to engage. Also give a shout out to Andy, because I was really mindful about paying attention to that reflection part that's listed in OCDI too, and have incorporated like opportunities for reflection in every class. Anyways, all this is to say, in like a spasm of fear and anxiety that lasted 3 days, I somehow like got out this course that's like ready to go. So, and it worked. Yesterday was great. So thank you, everybody.
So you said you mapped out your courses to like the quarter hour. Do you adhere to those schedules, or is it just kind of a loose set of objectives when you get to kind of operation?
I usually follow it to within 5 or 10 minutes. I'm usually able to land it.
I have
But I will
nowhere
say,
near the control over my class you do.
Well, I think probably, most of my courses are studio or field-based, and just having to manage, students over like a 3-hour period, and be mindful of like ebb and flow of attention. Like I really have to be very on it, or else I'm going to lose my students. And then.
Excellent. Trina, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot for a second. So Leslie's kind of talking up the Online Course Design Institute. I wondered if you want to take a second to tell people what that is.
All right. Yeah, the Course Design Institute, we offered it in the summer of 2021 for anybody who wanted to do that. And we are doing it right now, but we're doing it for courses that are being funded for online course development. I'm hoping that we will offer it again this summer. Last summer, we did it as a 5-week option, and there's 5 modules in it. The modules are set up to go through, you can help me a little bit, Dawn, but like teaching persona and teaching philosophy.
Mhm.
And the second one, you're working through your course goals and learning objectives. The third one that Leslie is talking about right now is mapping out your course, where Dawn and Katie did a great presentation on how to map out, and you're putting your learning objectives and your content and your assessment, you're lining all of them up. So you make sure you have that connection and the flow. Also make sure you have social presence and teaching presence going on in your classroom. So you're identifying all those components and putting them together. And I think that's a big chunk, like right in the middle there. And then trying to think where we go through there. The last one is assessment. We go through kind of the welcoming your students, have them prepare a welcome video in module 4. And then module 5, we talk more about assessments and finalizing the course design, getting your syllabus created, all those things. So we've modified it a little bit this time, and we'll keep modifying it based on feedback. So.
And one of the things that this kind of shows is that if you have a question, there's probably a resource prepared to help you with that question that you have. Global Campus, TLC, lots of other places on campus. There's lots of stuff out there. So one of the things that I hope we learn from this chat, if we learn nothing else, is that there are people on campus who can help if you ask a question. If you don't know who to ask, you can ask me, and then I'll take your question and send it to whoever needs to answer your question. But lots of people have dealt with these issues before. Just so long as you know, and you've seen this already in the chat, that it's unlikely that anyone's going to give you a specific answer of what you should do. More often than not, they're going to give you ideas and options, and then you're going to have to choose what makes the most sense for you. So what are other things that are going really well in our first classes this week?
So I did the thing where I asked my students, why they're taking the class, right? And first of all, 6 of them said because I was teaching, which made me happy. But second of all, I'm teaching Psych of Women. I teach it as Psych of Gender, but the answers were all very, I'm going to use the word woke, but good answers. Nobody said, oh, it's a requirement, or, oh, everything was full. Typically, I always have one of those. But no, everyone was there because they wanted to be, and I was very happy about it. And they acted like it. The lecture went really well.
That's awesome, Tiffany. I'm not surprised at all that they took it because you're teaching it.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
So I teach a methods lab, which they are required to take that course. And I asked that same question. The first answer I get is required. But then I actually had some answers about scientific literacy. I wanted to prove that. Like 2 or 3 people said a version of that. And I was like, okay, I can work with this. So that was really cool.
So Sarah, any comments on scientific literacy? I know that's one of your things.
It's one of my colleagues' things, but yeah, information literacy and all of that are huge for us in the libraries and helping our students understand. As I started putting it just yesterday, what happens before and after you hit that search button, like all that literacy coming together. So currently, I don't know if you guys know Carol Seven, she's our science librarian, and she is one of the big ones into science literacy. So folks want to reach out to anybody as they're thinking about literacies in their different professions. Librarians are happy to talk to you about that and how we can work with you and collaborate. Thanks, Don.
Sure. Awesome comment in the chat by Leslie, talking about Kathy Brockway's technique. Kathy Brockway is a frequent contributor to our PD series. Kathy Brockway's technique of asking students what they want to learn over the course of the semester, and then in each class meeting with answers to their questions. I think taking our students' questions really seriously and finding answers to them, or finding ways that they could find the answer to their own question, kind of empowering them to source the literature or design studies or those kind of things is important. Noah, do you want to talk at all about ways that we can use those questions to start out classes?
Yes, absolutely. So last semester, Don taught a general psychology course for about 200 students, and I was the TA. And we were getting some amazing questions that we did absolutely not know the answers to. And so Dawn would find these really, empowering, nice ways to say, I don't know, but we'd always follow up the very next class period. We'd go out and look for those questions, look for those answers, and start that class period by answering every single question that we did not have the answer to. We really think the students enjoyed that. They kept coming with more questions. And it was a really cool way to kind of build a community and show them that we care by taking the time to go find that information to follow up with them. And so, as Don always says, if you say you're going to find the answer, make sure you actually do and follow up. But it was a really cool experience.
And they would show their appreciation by actually applauding for Noah when he would come in and do those questions in the next classes. It was a really fun part of our class. And when he said we, it really was Noah. So it was good.
Noah, be sure and put that on your, your resume or in your job applications, gets applause when I enter the classroom.
I will put that the first line.
Yeah.
My teaching philosophy is the pursuit of applause. There you go.
I was going to say, having taught a long time here and thinking of other faculty who have now retired, it reminded me of something that one of our historians would do in his class at the beginning of class. He would always have a slide that did not relate to the course. It might have been a joke, a cartoon, an announcement about a community group or an organization in the building was having a meeting. He would use that as sort of his bulletin board, or he'd play music. He would do things that sort of settle the class down and let them know, okay, we're getting ready to start, but get into the mindset. And it wasn't necessarily about the content, but they loved it. And even student groups in our building could arrange with him to give him a slide for, announcement of our projects, so that there was no interruption once he started teaching the content. So I thought that was kind of a neat way to start a group of, these would be 150 or more students in a large room.
I love that. That's one of the things that I tell my students when I teach our language pedagogy class, is that it's a great way to start the class with something to spark curiosity that can or cannot be related to the class. Sometimes I'll put jokes, sometimes it'll be just like an interesting fact, like, did you know today is some, interesting festival, holiday in some place in the world? Just something to kind of get students thinking, or sometimes I'll put up an image and just have them an interesting image, have them discuss it, think about it, or a question, but just kind of using that initial time when students are filtering in to kind of start getting them curious about what they're going to be doing, whether it's related specifically to the course or not.
Well, it's always related to the course. I said that, but curiosity is something that sometimes takes thought by the faculty member to imbibe in their students' curiosity. Not all students are. I find it really challenges my creative self to think about how to instill that curiosity in a group of freshmen in particular. That's a new experience for them. So I have not had a class yet. I have my first class this afternoon, and I've already decided that I'm going to use a game to start them out. It's a creative game. It's about imagination. And before we do one single project or talk about the semester, we're just going to play a drawing game. Spark curiosity.
One of the things I love to use kind of as a hook at the beginning of my classes is a story. And I love to tell stories. I try to make them funny, and sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't. But one of the things that I love to ask my students is, why did I tell you that story? And it's amazing because sometimes they come up with better answers than the answer that I had. And it's really cool to see them make those connections and to establish the relevance and those kind of things. What you're kind of talking about, both LB and Andy, is maybe I go in and tell a random story and see if they can find some way to connect it to the stuff in ways that I hadn't even anticipated. Maybe that'd be a challenge for the critical thinking skills. So has anything gone less well this week? So we're kind of talking about the wonderfully engaged students and the cool stuff we're doing. Anything kind of not go according to plan this week?
I'd made some
Looks like things are
decisions.
going well. I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
I'd made some decisions at the end of last semester to make some tweaks to some of my classes and kind of different types of assignments, different point values, and haven't got as far along on that as I wanted to. So today was a bit of like, this is what the points are probably going to look like. I still need a few more days to finalize this. So just kind of behind the 8 ball and making those changes. Always good intentions to get them done over the break and never seem to go as fast as I hoped.
Yep. That's when Leslie was talking about planning her class to the quarter hours, like I have no idea what I'm going to be doing 15 minutes from now in my class. So I was just amazed at how we can have that kind of structure going in. I will say one thing that was surprising to me this morning was in all of my classes on the first day, I let my students ask me anything. And I'll tell my students, that the first day of class for me is to inform and excite. It'll let you know what my class is about so that you can make a decision whether you want to come back. And so toward the end, I said, what do you all need to ask me to help you make that decision? And they were asking wonderful questions about like my teaching strategies and practices. They're asking, do you read off your PowerPoints and those kinds of things? They're asking questions like one of them asked, if I was on the fence, talk me into staying in this class. And it was really kind of interesting to see them take this very, very seriously and really kind of like stare me down with the answers. Like they really were evaluating their choice to stay in the class. And I wasn't expecting that, but that was really kind of fun.
I'm saying this mainly for Leslie because we both teach first year, have taught studios, but there was a time in my younger years of teaching that I would be so exuberant about the subject that I would come in and just start a mile a minute, just go at it. And that's kind of difficult for students to just absorb all of that, passionateness about me. And so what I've done lately is to give an outline that is time specific in my mind of how long I'm going to take. So it's not written, but it is there in my head that let me tell you what we're going to do for the day. This is the agenda and I'm going to stay on it. And this, it's not like my faculty meeting, which says 20 minutes for this or 10 minutes for that. But I know in my head that has to take no more than 10 o'clock if the class started at 8:30. So I do have sort of a schedule in my head, not quite written. And then at the end, I go back and I reiterate what I said we were going to do to make sure everybody agrees that we got all the tasks accomplished. So that's a new way for me to slow down, take some deep breaths at the beginning, and still have that passion in the middle that I want to have and that enthusiasm that transpires to them. It just, they get it, they get excited. And that's when I want them to be excited. So that's for you, Leslie.
I think that's so helpful too. I started doing that a few years ago now after I do kind of my hook introduction, beginning of the class stuff. I'll have, okay, here's our objectives for today. This is the stuff we want to get done. And it's not necessarily like an agenda of like, we're going to do this, but just like, these are the kinds of things we want to explore. By the end of this class, we're going to be able to define this. We're going to, create X. And since I've started doing that, like, I kind of feel that there's a noticeable calm with like, after I give like, this is what our plan is for today. The students are like, oh, okay. Like they, one, recognize that there is a plan and it's not just, I'm not just like going in and saying whatever I feel like saying. And that they know then like what we're doing, why we're doing it, and they can kind of they can take a minute to mentally prepare and be like, okay, these are the things, this is where I need to get my mind to be able to participate in the class for the day. I think it really helps students to feel secure in the class. They feel like there's like, oh, okay, there's a plan. We're not just on like a runaway bus.
So what other experiences from this week do people want to share or ask about?
So I'm also teaching an online class, the psych of social media. I'm very excited about it. And I am going to have them do debates about some big topics in social media. So things like political misinformation, right? Controversial stuff. And I'm struggling a little bit with how to kind of balance those sides. So I'm going to randomly assign them to a side of the debate, but also allow them to express what they really think. And I'm like, should I let them do that in the same forum? Should I, because I don't want to silence their voice and make them argue something they only disagree with. So any tips or ideas would be much appreciated.
Tiffany, I have a question for you because that's similar to what I do in my pop culture class. This year, because there were 50 students, we set them up in groups of 5 or 10 discussion groups so that they had a small enough group to respond to. And they had to post first, and then because we made it pretty strict, we asked them to reply twice in that group. And that meant that they could choose someone else's position and respond to that, or they could write a post that then diverted the conversation to a different aspect of the issue. And we found that to be very, very successful. People were very thoughtful, more so than 11 years of teaching this course we've ever seen. They were on it. And I did the same thing with the art as well, because I do a social justice art post. And so that also worked very well. I saw art that I've never seen before from previous classes. So you might want to break them into smaller groups where they can really have conversation among them. When you take it across a large class, it gets hard to keep up with the conversation, or for them to choose what they want to respond to in it. So that was a new thing that we tried this year, and we felt really very, very good about everyone was engaged. Everyone was engaged because they could not avoid it.
One of the comments in the chat, Andy says, assigning students different perspectives in the debate. So they respond, for instance, from the perspective of a small business owner, an artist, a non-English speaker. I think it's a really cool idea to get them to empathize. So they're not just arguing what they think, they're thinking about different ways that whatever that topic could be to impact others. I really like that idea.
Yeah, I also like that idea. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I haven't done it for a couple years, but I did it a couple years ago, and I actually had them like role play. Not just argue it, but act like they were stakeholders in a meeting and, tussle. Not in a bad way.
I think one of the things that the role play aspect does too is it makes it less personal. So I'm not arguing as me. So I'm not necessarily held responsible for the content of the argument that I make. That might make it less intimidating for some of our students.
The other thing, Tiffany, that I've done when we were in person, we had to do this online, so it's a little different. But I'm finding that this generation has not done a bit of debate in high school, and they don't even know how to make those logical comments that work in debate when one is responding to another person directly and then going on to their own point of view. And so in the past, what I've done is I've actually set up a debate format in the room. And there is a person who starts out that debate and somebody on that team that ends it. And the people in the middle, they have to all as a team coordinate and sort of know what each point they're individually going to make so that they lead to some logical conclusion. And they enjoyed that because they've never experienced it. And in my case, I had one or two people in the room who had done debate, and they became my judges. So they had a responsibility as well. And we would deliberate at the end which team won. And so there was a little bit of competitiveness, but there was also this critical thinking that you want your students to do, and yet to have read, you force them to do some reading about the subject as well. So it all folds into a really nice day in class for them.
So you kind of mentioned the winners, kind of in a debate. And this is something I've been real ambivalent about. I don't use debate much in my classes at all. And part of the issue is, I might assign sides, but those sides might not be equally valid. If I come in and say, okay, this side of the room is going to talk about engaging students is a good idea, this side of the room is going to say engaging students is a bad idea, I would say those aren't equal in terms of their evidence and their argument. If the students are graded, and you didn't say that they were, but if they're graded on their winning, which I know some classes do that, I've always kind of worried about the inherent inequity of having to argue a stronger versus a weaker side inherently, and then have your grade rest on whether you won or you lost.
I'll tell you how I solved that. I do before we look at the film, in that case, you don't know which film, it is Promised Land. So it deals with fracking or what I have them do is decide whether they want to be an informed viewer. So there's a group of readings that the informed readers do. And then there's the group who says, I want to just go in as a spectator. I don't know anything about fracking. I'm just going to sit through the film and make a judgment call based on the film. And so what I'm looking at is the control group as opposed to the not controlled group, and saying, you as a control group, which side are you going to pick based on being informed? And the other group has to take the other side because they didn't read beforehand. So it gives me a way of seeing how the public responds, because it's a pop culture class, how the public responds to watching films that have some information in them, but create for us a perspective or perception of that particular industry or whatever. And it worked out very well. It's just not randomly chosen. They choose based on their knowledge base. And that is also graded. It's graded as those who didn't read beforehand. And those who didn't read beforehand get to read another set of readings to be prepared for the debate. So they each have different readings that they're doing, and how are they using those readings to critically, respond. So it's a little bit more controlled.
So there's an excellent sidebar. I won't repeat all of it, but Hayden is talking about something he does to have people disagree and actually engage in some civil discourse to talk through their opposing viewpoints. And there's a really good conversation going on that. But I see Francisca's hand is up. Francisca.
Yes, I saw a question in the chat, and it's actually a question I wanted to ask. So let's say you have a class where some people are on Zoom and you have some in person. How do you get those online to be engaged in the discussions going on in the class? It's been a struggle for me, so kind of need any suggestions.
Excellent. Francisca, thank you for bringing that back. The chat had kind of got away from me there for a second. So Jack had asked this question a couple of minutes ago too. So what are people's thoughts about how to get people in person and over Zoom engaged in a conversation together?
When I taught a much smaller class, like 9 students, I just would call on students in person and then on Zoom. And of course, the benefit of being on Zoom is their name. So that makes it all much easier. But when the conversation was lagging, I would just start to include students in the conversation. And since I was kind of doing it both in person, online, and I would kind of mix it up, I wasn't trying to make any student feel like they were being picked on or picked out as not talking. But then beyond that, I also started to realize that not all students are going to verbally contribute, whether it's in person or online. And so I started building in assignments in my class where prior to the class, they could post discussion questions. Like if I had a guest coming to class, then they could get participation points by posting on a board ahead of time what questions that they might have. And so I tried to be conscious of the different styles of communication people have and make space for that.
Excellent. Brandon, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, a method I found effective, I think it was in one of these meetings, is kind of the waterfall method. Is that if I have a question, I basically tell everyone on Zoom, like, I want you to take a few minutes, think about the answer to this question, type it into the chat, don't hit enter yet. And then once I've given enough time and say, okay, on 1, 2, 3, everyone hit enter, and then you get a whole bunch. And so it kind of takes some of the pressure off. Then you can start kind of discussing and talking through, and that can usually generate some discussion. And you're getting a lot of that from your Zoom students. To try to do the same thing simultaneously with people that are in person, you can either have them temporarily log into Zoom to do it, or just have the Zoom people kind of giving that part of the discussion.
So Greg talks about being explicit in our engagement expectations for those on Zoom. And I think this is a really important thing, because letting students know just because you're on Zoom doesn't mean you're exempt from engaging in the conversation and participating in the class, I think is important. In my Principles of College Teaching class, which is a smaller class, I think there are 8 people in there, so analogous to the situation Sarah is talking about. The expectation is every student uses their voices in every class, be they in person or over Zoom. And what I'll often do is I'll ask targeted questions that everybody will answer. So it's a way to make sure that everybody is kind of participating in that way. For free-form discussion, though, I haven't had as much luck with that. I'll be very honest with that. I haven't just kind of thrown out a question and had the Zoom people participate anywhere near to the same extent that the face-to-face people are presenting. So I'm wondering if anyone had any way to kind of balance that out maybe a little bit more. I'm not a fan of cold calling. That's something that I'm not as comfortable with, unless it's a graduate seminar, which I let people know that is one of the expectations. But in my undergraduate classes, I don't like cold calling people. So any thoughts on what I can do? Leslie's like, no, I got nothing for you. Sorry.
I don't think I have a lot except to maybe justify the fact that those students may be choosing to participate in Zoom because they can't be in the classroom and they've got some other things going on. They got earbuds in, they can't talk. And so I think sometimes there are some real reasonable reasons why they aren't participating when they're on Zoom.
And I think that's a fantastic point, Brandon. One of the things I do tell my students is if you're at home on Zoom, I will accept a chat. I'll accept a text chat in the thing. So you don't have to unmute yourself and do that, to try to mitigate some of those concerns. But I think, Brandon, you're making an excellent point. There might be other extenuating circumstances that are causing them not to participate as much. It's amazing what comes out sometimes, right? So we are about out of time, and I have really enjoyed kind of our first event. I'll remind you that the Professional Development Series is every Wednesday at noon. We'll have awesome speakers. We have the list of speakers kind of put in there and the list of topics, and we'll be putting out lots of stuff on our social media. We've got a Facebook and a Twitter feed. We'd love you to kind of, watch out for. We got lots of resources coming out of there, and we look forward to seeing you. Every once in a while, I'll have one of these chats. Most of these will be a little bit more specific to a specific issue with some presenters. And our presenter next week is Noah. What's our presenter next week? I forgot to pull up the schedule.
Yeah, Dr. Suzanne Parath is going to be talking about alternative forms for responding to content.
We also do promotional videos we put out of our social media. Hers might be my favorite. I won't even tell you any more than that, except to say that Dr. Parath's video might be one of my favorite promotional videos I've ever seen for any of our PD events. So check it out, get excited, and hopefully we'll see you here next Wednesday at noon over Zoom. So thank you all for taking some time today, and have a great start to your semester.
Thank you. That was awesome.